Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Malizia Mensah, and I will be moderating this session today. Um, welcome to the People's Social Impact Conference 2025. And today is day three, and we greatly appreciate all the brilliant leaders that came together to make this possible. As always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who have toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stewards whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Welcome to our distinguished panelists. This is going to be a great session today. Welcome to our distinguished panelists again. So please introduce yourselves to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your remarkable work. I guess we will start as we go. We can start with Michael.
First, so Michael Braithwaite, I have the honor and pleasure of being the CEO of Ludor, where I work with about 150 people that are much smarter than I am, doing the heavy lifting around helping our most vulnerable in their housing journeys, whether it be emergency or longer term or supportive housing, as well as a construction social enterprise called Construct, and helping people try and get better access to health care, which aids them in finding employment in housing. So great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Ryan, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, all. I'm Ryan Collins-Swartz. I'm grateful to be based here on Treaty 13 in Takaranto and be the co-executive director at Tapestry Community Capital. We're a not-for-profit working nationally across 7 provinces and territories to reshape our financial and investing system through the use of community bonds. We partner with organizations to raise funding on their own terms and mobilize community support. A huge growing area of our work is in affordable housing, and happy to speak to some of those examples today.
Thank you. Actually, let me bring it back to the conference. I didn't even state what today was about. We are going to be talking about affordable housing. So we need to bring that back into perspective. So, Rosemary, please introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here this lovely morning. My name is Rosemary Powell. I am the executive director for a community labor coalition here in Toronto called the Toronto Community Benefits Network. We started up back in 2014 as we were looking at just the disparity of income that continues to happen in our great city, despite the fact that Toronto was a booming economy, continues to be a booming economy, whatever you might hear, with massive amounts of our taxpayer dollars being spent on infrastructure. We saw that there was not a focused attention on the people who have to live with this infrastructure, who've been living with it and who will live with it in the future. We saw where people were being left out of the economy and left out of the massive job opportunities and other opportunities that were being created. And so we thought it was important that we mobilize, establish an organization that had the legal authority to be able to intervene in these kind of planning and infrastructure development opportunities.
Thank you. And Isaac, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you. My name is Isaac Ololafe. I'm co-founder of Dream Affordable Housing. Dream Affordable Housing has taken 20 years of real estate experience that I've been from developing, building, and managing properties all across the GTA. And with Dream Affordable Housing, the goal is to work with all levels of government, work with nonprofit organizations to help in developing affordable housing, constructing affordable housing, and also incorporating the labor and training component to the housing as well too. Great to see everyone.
Thank you. And Zach, please introduce yourself. Oh, do you prefer to be called Zach or your full name?
Zach is good for this call, sister.
All right.
Just a heads up, everyone. I'll do my best to announce it. I'm battling a bit of a flu, so I'm hoping I can find my inner Michael Jordan and speak as eloquent as possible. To that end, is it Malaysia?
Yes, it's Malaysia.
Yeah, Malaysia. Thank you, and thank you to Victor and your entire team for the opportunity. My name is Zachary Abdul, full name. Feel free to call me Zach throughout the call. I've had the privilege of working with Rosemary at the Toronto Community Benefits Network, where I learned a lot about her vigor and her organization and the coalition to sort of advance economic development for all communities, and how passionate and compassionate they are with ensuring all industries and sectors don't leave anybody behind with the economic prosperity our region has experienced. I've known Isaac for many years as well and the incredible work that he does. And I met Victor when I was working with the United Way in 2013 around a school to prison pipeline project, where Victor was kind enough to help me engage with young people in the Scarborough area. So this is feeling like a bit of a full circle moment. And I always love Cheryl because Cheryl's from the West End. And Cheryl, during a time where many folks weren't talking about housing, Cheryl took up the mantle in a very courageous manner and sort of advanced the housing conversation, but also the Black housing conversation. So, and Michael, I've followed you on LinkedIn for a very long time, so happy to be on a panel with you too. Now to myself, born and raised in Northwest Toronto, I've had the privilege of working across many different sectors, but in this particular role and why I'm here on the panel, filling in for Elder Emmanuel Mellis, who I adore and respect a ton, is that I'm the board chairman and president of a cultural recreation project for the Somali community, but also a project to address the broader Black community's social purpose real estate needs. At the end of the day, the Black community is not a monolith. The Black community has a ton of incredible diversity. We're very talented. I, one person, do not speak on behalf of an entire Black community. I'm just here in service to do my part to advance the conversation, to ensure much of what Rosemary's doing and many folks on this call is to make sure this economic prosperity that the region has experienced is benefiting all our communities. And with the Somali Center for Culture and Recreation Project as a social purpose real estate nonprofit, we've been able to advance the conversation around affordable housing quite a bit. And I look forward to highlighting how we've been able to do it throughout today's panel. But we've been focused on, our first major development is to land the building of a recreation and cultural center. But as we started doing that work, the feedback we heard from the broader Black community was to explore housing. And if you think of a lot of social purpose real estate, the broader needs of developing complete communities. And if you look at where a lot of Black communities live, they are not in areas or communities where complete communities are built. And development is not sort of seen as building all the social purpose real estate needs that our communities need and require to thrive. So I'll stop there and highlight a bit more.
Amazing. And Cheryl, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, hi, everybody. Great to see you today. I'm seeing a lot of great people in the room. So, as noted, yeah, my name is Cheryl Case. I'm the founder and executive director of CB Planning. So, this is a nonprofit community network that I founded in 2017 after my undergrad in planning, finding that there was a huge gap in the land use planning economy where there's a need for more direction and support around implementing a human rights-based approach to planning. So we have this amazing thing in this country called the National Housing Strategy, and it says that everybody has the right to have access to affordable housing. And so we need to ensure that we have systems that result in those outcomes. And so really proud to be supporting teams with community organizations to advance local priorities in affordable housing development and protection, while also stewarding and supporting and collaborating really closely with private sector, nonprofit, and government partners at the industry level so we can all work together to, again, align with the National Housing Strategy. So that's a little bit about myself and definitely a West Ender and very proud of that. So great to be here with Zach.
Everybody knows the West Side is the best side, Cheryl. Next, Leslie, good morning. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. And I just hail from the East. So I just want to say that out loud in this crowd. East is not least, just to remember that. I'm leading an organization, a not-for-profit charity called Civic Action. We've been around for a couple decades, and our real drive and mission is around the importance of civic engagement when addressing major urban issues. And over our 2 decades, we have really made a great emphasis on connecting established leadership with rising leaders, knowing that these big urban challenges we face, and housing obviously and housing affordability is one that is with us, has been with us for a long time. That we can't deal with it with one silver bullet, with one act. This is a commitment that has to sometimes span generations, and without a strong pipeline of civic-minded leaders, it's going to be very difficult to continue to do that. So that's our modus operandi. Currently, we are, in addition to expanding our work with rising leaders in the GTHA, we are very much focused on housing affordability insofar as it is an underpinning to the livability of the region. It is one of the key social determinants of health, which means it's not just the responsibility of home builders or even policymakers. It affects, the transportation industry, the healthcare industry. It is important to big business because it's a talent attraction and retention issue. And so we come at housing at affordability in that way, and look upon the challenge and the problem of one of extreme fragmentation. And how is it we can bring policymakers to be more aligned, government investments, private investments, philanthropic investments to be more aligned, because the challenge you're facing, the speed and the scale with which we need to address it is overwhelming. And so that's the sort of point of view I bring to this conversation. And having spent, prior to being at Civic Action, quite a lot of my time and career in large infrastructure projects and regional policy areas. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Really humbled to be with this crowd. So now, Melissa, you're on mute.
See what happens sometimes. You're too busy directing, you don't pay attention. So I guess I'm already speaking with you, Leslie. So I'm just going to go to the next question. So what is the most rewarding part of your work currently?
Hope. I think the most rewarding part, because I think we've been doing a lot of research, talking to so many people, and the severity of the problem can be quite numbing. I watch so many organizations working so hard to move this forward. And it is sort of it's heroic, and it at its sort of most basic level, because of the state we found ourselves in. But the hope I have is the work we do and the conversations we have with leaders, rising leaders. Often they're mid-career, they're doing enormous work within their own community, but their ability and their aspiration to do more and to scale and to be better connected to the more, decision makers, politicians. We just need to step out of their way and give them the path to move through. Because I'm old now, I can say we. But I think that is what makes me hopeful, because it's never really a technical problem. It's a people problem often. I think there's some people say it's a governance problem. I actually think it's a point of view and perspective is valid in and of itself, because it's what people are living and experiencing. We need to understand that better so that we can actually really take, when you're writing a policy, ask yourself, not is it perfectly written, who is it for? Who is benefiting? Have I asked them, will they really benefit? Because I also believe we don't know what we don't know, none of us. So that is the what is coming behind, coming up. And
I think that you're right. Everybody has different pieces that they could bring to make it for a better, bigger picture. Isaac, what is the most rewarding part of your work currently?
Yeah, no, really doubling down on what Leslie mentioned in regards to the hope, being in real estate for the last 20 years, coming from the Black community and launching a real estate brokerage, selling for a lot of developers across the GTA, seeing where the gaps were when it comes to affordable housing, and decided that you got to be part of the manufacturing of housing. And that's why 11 years ago, we got into the development space to develop and build condos and houses, and commercial building in the GTA. So the hope is there because now all levels of government, foundations, nonprofits, even private sector are coming together to tackle affordable housing, not because of the need of the vulnerable groups. That's part of the reason, but because affordable housing has now hit mainstream. I'm hopeful because everyone's at the table, but I'm a bit worried because now that everyone's at the table to tackle it from a mainstream point of view, the groups that were always suffering are going to continue to suffer, right? So this is why with the work that we're doing with 20 years of experience, we're now collaborating with the private sector. We're now collaborating with all levels of government so that we're bringing that perspective of representation as well to be part of the solution. Because solutions are being brought to the table, But if there's not enough representation on that solution, the billions of dollars going to infrastructure, you're not going to see the youth in our community getting jobs because we're not the ones are the contractors. But when you now collaborate with organizations like Blue Door, et cetera, that's where you're able to change some of that narrative. When you have Rosemary advocated on the community benefits side, now you're able to change that narrative. So I'm hopeful and I'm excited about the opportunity because now everyone's talking about it.
In terms of all levels of government are focused on affordable housing now, and investments are being offered. And I think more importantly, too, now you see members from the community who are actually more attuned to what's happening. And we're looking at affordable housing or the investment that needs to happen in affordable housing as an opportunity for economic development for people on the ground. And so we're looking at um, you know, over the last 10 years, so TCBN has turned 10 years now, okay? It's a movement, I think, that we've built, that we've grown. We see a lot of engagement at the citizenry level. People from our network are being advocates, demanding their place in the economy. They're being very active politically. The city of Toronto has decided that affordable housing is something that is going to be a priority to them. Why? Because we've gone to several committees just pushing the envelope and making sure that people are deputing people attention to it and seeing that this is something that it's not going to go away. There's a lot of active interest, people who are ready to participate, people who are ready to roll up their sleeves and to be able to perform the work and to participate in the jobs and the economic opportunities too, that we believe that will come out of it. And so I think for me, that's where I see, that this kind of the excitement on the ground where people before were not feeling engaged or that they had any power to be able to intervene, that now they're moving government to do what is needed in order to address this crisis.
Thank you. Cheryl, what is the most rewarding part of your work currently?
Yeah, I think a lot of great things being said on this panel. For me, what's the most rewarding is really just seeing the excitement from all the amazing people who have been pushing at the grassroots level, but also within government and the private sector. There's so much enthusiasm and excitement to get things moving, and it's really incredible to see what happens when we come together and to move things forward, right? So, for example, in the Jane and Finch neighborhood, hearing about the long, hard years they spent in developing what they're calling a growing in place strategy to help prevent displacement, learning, just a bunch of local leaders coming together, resulting in a city program being called Growing in Place, and that scaling to multiple neighborhoods. Now we have Little Jamaica, Mount Dennis, other neighborhoods as well with high Black populations, as well as other neighborhoods more broadly are able to benefit from the hard work and leadership of, again, just some local community leaders who took action and were able to find folks in government and in private sector who agreed with them and thought that this is something worth investing into and to build on. And so it's really things like that and seeing what can happen just from the spark of the civic action of folks coming together to make a change. So that's really what excites me and gives me hope.
Thank you. Zach, what are the most rewarding parts of your work currently?
I'm really loving the positivity. And I believe the positivity is stemming from the question of how we're the Somali Center for Culture and Recreation project is it's that helped him land in Canada in the mid 1980s in Montreal. Also attempted to build this space. So the rewarding part for me is that this is a generational effort. And when you think of a lot of Black community-led projects and you think of a lot of Black philanthropic efforts, a lot of, unfortunately, what happens is erasure of our stories, erasure of our placemaking, displacement of where our communities have historically been. And I can, speak to the incredible work TCBN has tried to do around supporting the Eglinton LRT crosstown work and ensuring that Black businesses are protected. But if you look at where Black communities have been in the GTA and in Toronto, historically. And if you go back to even historical Black communities in Buxton and southwestern Ontario, there's a constant attempt when we think of infrastructure, housing, placemaking as a whole, of not acknowledging the role that Black communities have had in construction, in real estate, in development, and how we built the country that is Canada that we all love, and how we played a significant role. So the reward of doing a lot of the work I'm doing now as a volunteer, I'm a volunteer board chairman and president. Our entire board is volunteers, is that our civic action has been inspired by delivering on a collective dream and turning it into reality. And that collective dream and helping it become a reality is a lot of what folks are sharing about being able to deliver on affordable housing. And I'll pick up there with what Isaac shared about his years and efforts of trying to get affordable housing built. Now that we have all orders of government, philanthropy, the private sector all talking about, we want to partner with nonprofits. We want to sort of work with diverse communities, Black, Indigenous. Will that sort of policy speak of sorts change if the political winds change, right? So how do we work closely with incredible civic, mobilizers like Leslie and her team at Civic Action? And I think of a project, Leslie, that Civic Action did, not on affordable housing, but on youth employment. So I was formerly a champion member, a table member, when Savan Pabatsian was the CEO as a part of a project called Escalator. We were looking to address barriers to youth unemployment. And that work at that time was specifically around addressing NEET youth, not having employment, not being in school, and the fact that there was scarring happening. So we think of civic action today, and this conversation, I think an incredible next step would be, and I'm not saying civic action is not doing that work Leslie now is, civic action is one of the most well-respected sort of spaces that we have that bring together people from across industries. Affordable housing not only needs to be delivered for all communities, but it needs to be delivered at scale. And it's the biggest crisis facing all our industries. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter if you work in construction, real estate, philanthropy, healthcare. Because we all believe, I like to assume that housing is a human right. How do we sort of ensure that we all have a collective understanding of building that? And as much as there are investments being made, it costs a lot to build, and it's very expensive to build, which means this problem we're facing collectively, right, as leaders, is not going anywhere. So, how do we continue to work together and be very nimble? In terms of the rewarding aspect of working on affordable housing, when we decided to work with the city to try to find public land, as volunteers, this was a very onerous and painful process on the project. One that I hope goes in a book that many people can write down the line because we mentioned a lot on this call about trust. When you look like I do, and many of us do on this call, we are not given trust by government. That is the fact and the truth. Whether it comes to procurement, whether it becomes the opportunity to be deemed to be builders, no matter our expertise, and we have expertise in our volunteer board of over 20 years of infrastructure development. It's the way that we come forward as our communities when we're a community project, not a private sector project, let's say, of folks who have generational wealth. So for our communities to further trust partnering with government to deliver affordable housing, governments, the private sector need to start trusting us and not only what we've had to overcome for generations to show resilience, to deliver scope, and a lot of what the investments that our communities, in terms of Black communities, get are program dollars, operational dollars. And in 2022, the Somali Center partnered with the Infrastructure Institute and Maddie Timatiki's team around a report called Inhibited Growth. And in that report, we spoke to the lack of public infrastructure dollar investments in Black communities. Isaac and Alika from NIA Center for the Arts all attended a panel in February 2023 at UFT about the report. How many of these dollars, public dollars, go to Black infrastructure projects? And what is the scope and scale, including affordable housing? For example, with the Housing Accelerator Fund and that money, how many projects will be partnering with Black community organizations, right? And data will tell us the story. Announcements won't tell us a story, even when Black organizations get invited. The data will tell us a story. Accessing that data is how we're going to move forward. And I'm sharing a lot of this because what's been rewarding is uncovering some of these realities and challenging how we look at public land for public good. Will that be the same story of Black Canada going forward, that we want to leverage public land a lot more intimately and intentionally? And as a father of three beautiful girls, what's also very rewarding is that I'm doing this work so my daughters don't have to do this work. And I'm hoping that they don't have to do this work because then they know that the communities they come from are able to get the investments and advanced development. So that's what I find to be most rewarding of a lot of the work we do on the Culture and Recreation Center project. Short form is SCCR. I'll speak more to the housing piece later on. I know we have a bunch of questions, Melissa.
Yes. And it's true what you're saying, Zach, because coming from like all the work that you guys are doing is amazing. Because I come from subsidized housing, and you're right. Our parents came, to the country, and they were given that opportunity. Now it's our turn to actually push forward and elevate what we have in our situation with our community. That was great, Zach. Thank you. Ryan, what is the most rewarding part of your work currently?
Thanks, Malaysia. I would build on that and say we're challenging that narrative that exists around affordable housing that works against community-led initiatives. And that says we need billions of dollars from government, from private investment that's going to go to private developers who will build maybe a little bit of affordable housing in the for-profit housing that they're building. I'm very proud and take a lot of joy from the organizations that we speak to every day that come to Tapestry, that are community-led organizations from coast to coast, who have really big dreams of building very community-centric housing in their community, but face a lot of barriers when it comes to financing, especially when they're not located in urban centers. So for example, Propolis Cooperative in Kamloops, BC, they're building net zero totally affordable cooperative that's in response to a lot of the forest fires that are happening out west, or places for people in Haliburton, Ontario, and the Kawarthas that's building housing at a low cost for women fleeing domestic violence. Based on their location, based on their leadership, based on not owning existing assets, they struggle to access a lot of traditional financing. And then even when they do, it's slow to access government programs. So through partnering with us and supporting the issuance of community bonds, we've seen Propolis acquire their land, raising over $1 million from community investors, places for people, building up their supply by 12 units over there. And it's a really direct, rewarding impact, seeing people go from dream and ambition to mobilizing the resources to act on that. I think there's something else that's also very rewarding is hearing community investors, everyday people reflect on their experiences of supporting these projects. And I think affordable housing is an area where it's easy for the average person to feel very helpless. What can I actually do to make a difference in this cause? Being what is possible, and it's a very tangible way for someone to make a difference with the money that they might have saved up to invest it in affordable housing, with the recognition that a lot of mainstream investments, whether it's in real estate investment trusts, is actually going against the work that we're talking about today and can actually be working to cause displacement, increasing rents. So very much rewarding to be doing this work in community bonds, supporting organizations to raise funding and implementing projects as a direct impact.
Right. Impact. Oh, that's what keeps you as rewarding. And Michael, what is the most rewarding part of your work currently?
You know what gets me inspired and fired up is all the brilliant young people that I'm seeing more and more come into the space. People like Cheryl and Leslie, of course, young people. But but I see
Thanks for
this and
calling me young, Michael.
yeah,
That's gold.
you know,
That's what I was going to
Leslie
tell you
is
earlier, Leslie. You're not old, but thank you
no,
for letting
not
me
at
know.
all. But we see a lot of young people, and I see like Leslie's team and all these people that are brilliant and passionate and care, and that gives me great hope. Unlike Leslie, I am old, and I'm saying, these are the individuals that are going to make real change happen. I've got limited years, left. And so I think what we can do as leaders in the space is empower and give the space and support to these young leaders to really light things up. We have a little podcast on the way home. We're going to have Cheryl on soon, but that inspires me, right? So I talk to leaders from across Canada, around the world, risen up. They come up with creative and innovative ways around it. Ryan, we've had your team from Tapestry come on to talk about community bonds and how that's another way forward. And so there's tons of solutions out there. That gives me hope. We know what to do. There's lots of things we could do. It's just a matter of figuring out which ones we focus on, how we push those forward. And so things can change. Things can get better. And the podcast is really that kind of all those different brilliant people. And I nerd out over it every time why do you do it? Because I get to talk to these people and be inspired each week.
Okay. And so since I'm already speaking with you, Michael, what are the key challenges in affordable housing ecosystems in Canada?
Well, I think, listen, I mean, there's a lot of people much smarter than myself that have been working on this for years. People like Steve Pomeroy out of Ottawa, who's been at this probably since in the 90s. And he'll say you can't really ever talk about affordable housing if you don't also talk about incomes as well, right? In the 90s, people were receiving Ontario Works, which is almost the same, sadly, as what it is now. They can actually afford a one-bedroom apartment with that, right? That was Ontario Works, which is now, I think, tops out with everything in. Your shelter allowance is like just $300-400, and then up to $700 for a single person. We know that a one-bedroom apartment in the GTA is about $2,000, so there's a massive gap. You're receiving ODSP, disability, that's $1,300, so you still have a massive gap. So the rental gap is continues to grow, right? So that's a concern. So we have to talk about incomes and living wages, and people like Rosemary, who are the Toronto Community Benefits, are pushing to get people. We get people into the trades, and what I love about that, and we do affordability too, right? CMHC, federal government would define affordability as 80% of mid-market rent, so 1,600 instead of say 2,000, which isn't affordable to most. So what is truly affordable going forward? So that's a challenge too. And listen, I think there's a lot of nonprofits across the GTA, across Canada, that are coming, and Blue Door being one of them. We're going into the development game, but it's a scary prospect, because when you develop a property, not only, maybe you have to first get land, and if you have land, a nonprofit has to put down close to, between $500,000 and $1 million to get shovel ready. That's when you can apply for funding, right? So you have to take that out of your own dollars, and that's a pretty risky investment to say to your board, hey, we're going to put down $500,000, $1 million of our own money with no guarantee that we're going to get the dollars to actually secure and move forward with building. And a lot of nonprofits have no idea. And us being one of them, we hire consultants because we are not developers. We're social service agencies, right? But we are going into development because it's needed. The actual market on its own, private market, is not the solution to moving forward in the housing crisis. We've also started something called a land trust too. For every new affordable that's built, the data shows us we lose 7 to 15 affordable units to the private sector. People buying it up, it's no longer affordable, crumbling infrastructure, because we haven't invested enough in keeping those properties safe and dignified, right? So we need things like land trust to actually keep affordable properties in them, build and keep them deeply affordable in perpetuity, so we can slow that number down. We'll never actually kind of build our way out of this if we don't keep the affordable units as they are affordable in perpetuity through different innovations as well, right? So I think there's that. The nonprofit is a bigger role to play. We just have to enable them. And there's groups right now. The United Way has stepped up big time to say, hey, we're going to invest and help nonprofits take some of that risk out of it by providing you with pre-development dollars and those types of things, so you can look at the lands you have and work with private partners to make this happen. So lots of stuff happening right now, really, but that income piece is important. We have to have discussions around that. Our assistance programs that are lagging far behind are a part of that. We'll never. And then the other last piece too is that you can't really talk about any kind of crisis if you don't focus on prevention too. A lot of what we've done in the past is reactionary, right? Emergency housing. Now people are already experiencing homelessness and they're unhoused. Right. So how do we focus on prevention for stopping? You can't end it if you don't stop new people from coming in. So programs like eviction programs, eviction prevention programs, going upstream into schools to make sure that youth have the support so they don't drop out of school, so they don't experience homelessness, so families can reconnect and stay together. All those pieces. But prevention is a tough sell to government because usually they have a 4-year mandate, and prevention, that results from prevention might maybe 8, 10 years down the road, and they need to show results now, right? But if you don't actually turn off that tap, you'll never stop the flow.
Right. So if with the 4 years with the government, how I guess that would be one of the challenges trying to maintain that same relationship you have, especially if the parties change.
Yeah, I mean, you're always look at our sector right now is losing their mind because yeah, we're in a tough situation now, but federally, I think we're going to see a change of government where it could get worse. When there was a conservative government in before, they didn't do a heck of a lot around housing. And so what is that going to mean? But I mean, you can either throw your hands up and complain, or you can double down and think about what are the strategies and how do you make your strategies align with the strategies that are out there, right? If it's an investment and showing that return on investment is what that new government needs, then you've got to change and kind of pivot and get in there early and have the conversations and really push for that and demonstrate with the data that investing in housing is actually better for the whole GDP, right? It's better for healthcare. It saves dollars and saves lives. But maybe you're focusing on that economic argument first and the people argument second, which is sad but true. But you just have to pivot and change really what you're doing and know that government changes and don't hitch yourself always to. You've got to be very careful that you're not seen as, say, a liberal loving organization or conservative loving because when it does change, you're going to lose traction, right? Your job is to work with the government of the day, no matter who's in there, who was voted in democratically, and do the best for your clients. And that's what you're supposed to do. So really be nonpartisan and work with whoever's in there to try and get the results. And we've seen in labor, and I think I would hope Rosemary would agree, is that the conservatives have invested a lot in the trades over the last since 2018. They've done a lot of good work in the trades, and we've certainly seen that at Blue Door, and that's pulled a lot of people out of poverty. So you can work different governments in there. It's just figuring out what their mandate is and trying to match your needs to theirs.
Thank you. Rosemary, what are the key challenges in affordable housing ecosystem in Canada?
One of the things I guess that I would talk about and how kind of community benefits and community benefits agreements come into play is that concept of perverse outcomes. So Hamilton, for example, has been promised an LRT for at least many years now, prior to TCBN even starting, because that was the big plan, right? Regional and massive investment in regional transit. And what we've seen, we just the documentary Trainwreck, we basically just showed it to our community here, and what we learned is that because of that. I guess, investment that government has been promising for this LRT for so many years, Metrolinx has been buying up all the land along that people have lost affordable housing along the way without any kind of plan for how they're going to look at rebuilding. And the train still hasn't come, right? But people are losing their housing. People's housings are being bulldozed, literally, and being kicked out without any kind of replacement for how and they're going to live. We know that it's impossible to find the same kind of rent that, right? So what is the plan? Sure, they may give them a little bit of a buyout that may last them for 6 months, but how are they going to be able to live, over the next 10, 20 years? How's their family going to be able to live? The stats in Hamilton show that for every 23 affordable private makes no sense. So that's why through the community benefits advocacy process, affordable housing becomes one of the demands that are a part of the conversation that residents can push to make sure that there is concrete action units. And so we're looking at 20 to 30% being that target that we want to push for. And we're educating local residents about what is possible, looking at examples that have been done in other neighborhoods and basically helping them to look at, thinking about, for example, there's in Little Jamaica, there is a young woman, I love this story. She lived right across a condo unit that was being proposed. And why? Basically just shot up. And so here is a massive government investment, that happened in that neighborhood, and it is now spurring all sorts of private development along the way. And this young woman, who is a member of the TCBN, who understands the community benefits process, never thought before of, oh, maybe I can have a voice. And so there was a community consultation session that happened, and she participated. And she stood up and asked a question. She says, do you think that you would be willing to have a community benefits requirement on this project? Because we would like to see that there be affordable housing on this condo building that you're doing. And lo and behold, they didn't want a confrontation right there in the middle. And they said, sure, we will consider it. And so following that, they reached out to the Toronto Community Benefits Network. She sent an email. Toronto Community Benefits Network became involved. We had conversations with the developers. We had conversations with the City of Toronto. We looked at, okay, what are some of the concessions that they can make in exchange for heightened density? And as a result, we are now in the process of having active conversations about what percentage of affordable housing is going to be on that condo building. So the idea of making sure that there is a process and intentionality in every single building that is going to be built, every development project, that there is a conversation about affordable housing, and that becomes a part of the concessions and the demands that are going to be incorporated in the community benefits agreements that we can monitor, track, and report over time. So in the absence of government policy, these kinds of community benefits and policies and processes are actually quite useful.
Because I feel like we as the public, sometimes there is that fear, that mindset where you don't believe that you do have the say, and you believe if you do talk, it's going to make the situation worse. So it's kind of better to just stay quiet and then just I guess deal with it. So it's like, how do you find it? Like when you're dealing with the community, how do you find, like, how are you able to discuss with them to change their mindset and letting them know that they do have a voice? Are you gonna, like, do you have to be that middle person, or like how does that work?
Absolutely. And this is what we're doing, through community benefits, making sure that the developers are being brought to the table. They're being forced to have a conversation that they would not normally have with community, bring in the different levers from the different levels of government that would be able to support, and make sure that it's a win-win for everyone. Right? Because at the end of the day, we're very proud as community that we have so much talent that we can contribute as well in the development of that project, and we want to be able to contribute, whether it be through physically being able to help build that project, or helping to make the case to the city for reductions in maybe property taxes, or other types of incentives that the developer may be able to achieve as a result of making concessions to the community. But it's about that, having that sense of agency that you can actually negotiate with those decision makers.
Thank you. Isaac, what are the key challenges in affordable housing that you see?
Yeah, so I think it's really facing and looking at the realities. The reality is it's hard enough to build affordable, purpose-built rental. So to focus on building affordable housing without really looking at the end-to-end holistic situation that the GTA is facing or Ontario is facing, that we're really not going to have a solution. You got to look at the growing number of immigration and those that are migrating here to the city. What is the solution of that? So we got to look at how do we prevent even homelessness? The hotel that we built a couple of years ago in partnership with other organizations, we've housed hundreds of those that are newcomers, refugees, homelessness in our hotel, and then we transitioned them out into purpose-built rental in collaboration with landlords. But we were only able to do that because we collaborated with a platform like Wovio that was helping them with their credit building, and then now we're working with other developers and seeing how do we do rent to own for those are not ready to actually buy. And then now we're looking at what are the major development sites that are happening? What are the major projects where both provincial and municipal are putting billions of dollars into infrastructure and seeing how do we carve out a piece there and plug it into a larger infrastructure, right? So I think there's so many moving parts to this topic, and it's if we isolate just affordable home ownership, we're really just going to be talking in circles because we're not talking about employment, we're not talking about all the condos that are sitting empty, and how do we carve that out into fractional ownership, right? So there's so many different pieces, but the good thing, the conversation is happening. I think now, like all levels of government play a big role. Organizations like United Way that wants to now play in the development space, they play a big role. All the major redevelopments that are happening in Scarborough, Golden Mile, Jane and Finch, like they happen at Lawrence Heights and still continuing, or like they've happened in Jane and Regent Park, we got to look at lessons learned from those and say, what could be done? Because, the Regent Park development was when condos were $200,000. They're no longer $200,000. So if affordable housing couldn't work 10 years ago, 15 years ago at Regent Park, how is it going to work now with average prices of 600,000, 500,000, and with rents going up and cost of construction going up and immigration going up and youth employment going up, right? Unemployment, sorry, going up, and incarceration and trying to give second chances, right? So there's so many components to this, but the solutions are there and the funding is there and we're seeing it. The provincial government with different initiatives, they deployed capital into skilled trade. Our foundation or other foundations saying that we got to change some of our mandates from programming to affordable housing. But the key is collaborating with those that have the experience, collaborating with those that have representation, and those that could.
Cycles, and these are challenges that require much more sustained effort. And I think Michael mentioned the importance of making, I would call it the business case for why the investment is worthy. But I want to talk a little bit about the constituency that is required to ride the waves of politics. And I'll give my example. Sustaining diverse interests of leaders, whether they're elected from, I know I've worked a lot in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. We have a bit of a vacuum right now in terms of leadership, but when those elected representatives are able to collaborate and work together, and when there is a constituency, and by constituency I mean diverse constituency, business, not-for-profit, community, individuals who share an interest. And in the early 2000s, it was about sprawl and the need to preserve the Oak Ridges Moraine and the Green Belt. And it was leadership and the alignment between at a provincial level, municipalities and the work of many people to raise the awareness, educate, reach out to communities across the region so that there was everybody signed on to the importance of addressing it and the need to actually not just talk about it and do small things, but do macro, mesoscale things like legislation and so forth. Now, that constituency has eroded or ebbed. People come and people go, and which started in the early 2000s, survived a change of government, completely different political stripes, because the voices of the residents, the business, the politicians said, this is important to us. It remains important to us. And housing is one of those issues right now that is important to everyone. So in addition to sort of making the book case on the balance sheet about why this is important, there needs to be a fairly diverse, not siloed call and people standing next to each other actually reflecting this idea that we're all standing together to say that this is what we need. And I think we're seeing a bit more of that now on the housing affordability issue, but there needs to be more. And partly because housing affordability and the needs are so diverse now, and it's dramatic how different, and therefore the perspectives to the issue are very different. And they shouldn't be competing in the sense that we need all of it, and everybody it needs to be in the tent in order to recognize that. And it's not gonna, what is the saying we used to say in the pandemic? We're all in this boat, but we're all in different kinds of boats. That's what's happening with housing affordability. But we can't, as a result, say my boat is better than yours or my plight is more difficult, even if it is, because it just fragments us, and then we become easy targets for government to pick and choose from amongst. So the solidarity on the issue, in my mind, is one of the most critical things to be. And so this kind of group, which is from all different perspectives on the issue, the more folks can be supporting each other in their efforts, the greater we will find, I feel we'll be in a better place to survive dramatic shifts in politics.
Thank you. Ryan, what are some of the challenges?
Thank you. When we look around the world, the issues related to displacement, wealth inequality, and housing affordability aren't if and the belief of organizations like the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association that have released a lot of research on the value of non-market housing puts Canada amongst the lowest of similar countries in the world for housing that's owned by nonprofits, cooperatives, charities, and publicly owned. I think to really overcome these challenges, we need to drastically grow the amount of non-market housing. Through my work, I get to go to lots of different conferences, both nonprofit and for-profit. When I go to some of the for-profit conferences, they're not talking about a housing crisis. They're not talking about a lack of affordable housing. Often the conversation is around the booming real estate industry in Canada and how it makes up a really significant portion of GDP. So our belief at Tapestry is helping non-market providers grow and scale through access to capital and public support. And a lot of these organizations are there. They have the solutions. They're based in community. They need better access to capital. That first needs to come through government. We need to see a return to the major investments that were made in the 70s and 80s that recognized housing as an investment, not as a cost or as an expense. And I'm with Leslie on this one of the solidarity across different sectors where housing affordability is a climate issue, it's an economic issue, it's an equity issue, it's a health issue, it's an arts issue. And we see through the community bond, it provides an opportunity for community members to join in solidarity. For example, one of our community land trusts that we worked with, who just is in the final stages of acquiring their next property, they received an investment. One of their hundreds of community investors tweeted about it yesterday, and they're a local author, a notable author. And they said, once I signed my latest book deal, I chose to invest in the Kensington Market Community Land Trust because living in affordable housing for the past 6 years gave me the freedom and the time to be able to work and publish this book. So through my economic gain, I choose to reinvest that money in affordable housing. And I really hope that a big part of overcoming these challenges will be more collaboration, more solidarity between different sectors. And we're really encouraged by the amounts of organizations that are non-market, raising funds and building up the sector.
Thank you. I can't wait to see that, but with Kensington Market, I love going there on Sundays. Cheryl, what are some of the challenges that in Canada?
Yeah, I say that a lot of really great points again being brought up today. The need for investment, I think, could not be over emphasized. When we look at as Ryan mentioned, the investment that was being poured in, just no more than 40, 50 years ago, getting back to those levels, but also we think about it from an economic development perspective, right? In this country, we have lots of people who are underemployed or unemployed, while we also have a lack of labor in the trades and development, right? So a lot of people could actually be getting really great jobs if they were working in the development of affordable housing. So, for example, the Canadian Institute of Planners, this is a body that looks at the working conditions and directs how planners operate in this country. That's one of the professions that really guide land use housing development. On average, they make about $90,000 a year. That sounds like a really great salary, right? Much higher than the average. But what we're finding is that a lot of these grassroots organizations, as well as the larger organizations, don't actually have the capacity to employ folks. And a lot of this work is being done at the side of people's desks or actually being done with no compensation at all. So we actually did a survey with one of the community partners that we work with. This is the Oakwood Vaughan Community Organization. This is a group of retired seniors, mothers, daughters, sons who are all working together in collaboration to address the affordable housing gap. And so we found that they actually only, as an organization, had $100,000 in income to pay the staff that they were able to secure with that funding to do the work of building an affordable housing strategy, looking at sites for development, and helping to push them through the different stages that are required to eventually get that capital investment. So only $100,000 is what they had for the year, but actually, if you look at all the volunteer labor, it brings it to $500,000. So there was $400,000 in unpaid labor that was being invested into by these communities. And you think about the impact that has on their individual well-being because they're having to make choices of, not going to work or not pursuing their own personal development because they're prioritizing the community. And so that point, again, that Ryan brought up about productivity is a really major one when we think about there's so many people again who are unemployed, underemployed, or are volunteering to get us to where we need to be to in terms of affordable housing development. If we actually created jobs that were enable people to focus their time on these topics, we'd be much more productive. So we know that low income and underhousing is one of the leading have these amazing people who are so passionate, who find their way to move things forward, enable then for industry to come in and to support. And so I'm going to just share in the chat this survey that we're circulating now. And so, looking at displacement, we've been able to partner with the City of Toronto and with some of the recommendations that came as a result of we had a panel of over of 8 different experts from the United States and from Canada in the nonprofit, private, and public sector, engage over 80 experts from across Canada, going as far as Vancouver and our East End as well, engaging also, folks in local neighborhoods and asking, okay, what is it that you're experiencing? What are your suggestions around affordable housing? And so this panel then came up with a list of recommendations on the policy and investment solutions that are required to ensure that everybody has a right to, or that to implement the right that everyone has to have access to dignified and secure affordable housing. And so there's a list of various recommendations, but I'm going to just highlight 3 of them. So number one, they recommended that 60% of all new affordable housing be non-market, of all housing, sorry, that's built, be affordable or non-market, which I think is very significant considering, again, this is a primarily private sector-led project in collaboration, of course, with city planning, CP planning and the City of Toronto. Number 2, that 60% of existing affordable housing be preserved, right? And then number 3, that there be a task force being established to really proceed over the implementation of strategies to make sure that the community is part of the process along the way, not just at the upfront for industry to kind of take and move away and kind of come back afterwards, but we're going to be with you along the whole way of the process. So really that the challenge is really about the fact that there's a lack of investment, enabling people to have the agency to do the work.
Sorry, I got a little excited. I double tapped and then I muted myself back.
This is a great conversation. There's so much. Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, I'm in terms of summarizing what's been shared, everything that's been shared is brilliant and very thought-provoking as well. I think I'm seeing it through like a pest analysis almost in terms of like looking at it from a political lens, an economic lens, a social lens, and then also technological lens in terms of, pressures the private sector when they do convene and have some of these for-profit conferences and gatherings around technological management, conversations around modular, around how do we build quicker, how do we use new technologies. But I go back to what Leslie flagged. Like, we're at a stage now where this challenge we're facing around affordable housing, it's a 50-year problem. It dates back to when governments began to not invest in social housing or affordable housing back in the 1970s. Then you fast forward 30 years later, the devolution of responsibility where municipalities were sort of pegged to, okay, you guys go build now. The province is not going to build anymore. And then now you fast track, almost 30 years later, 25 years now, 2025, and some of the global forces that Ryan eloquently spoke to, we're now at a place now, as Leslie flagged, we do not have the runway to get tied into political ideology. The problem is here, and the problem will be here for the foreseeable future. So, how do we collectively come together in a sort of consistent and cogent manner to deliver on addressing some of these challenges and being open and not being tied to our ideological or political tribes of sorts about how we tackle this problem as city builders, as civic-minded folks. And ultimately, if you attend for-profit or more private sector sort of spaces, they'll even flag a level of morality in terms of they're wanting to help. They'll say, we want to help. We want to address the crisis. But what is the civic moral sort of rope or bind that's keeping us all together to be open to addressing some of these key challenges, right? And that's the question I always ask myself, right? It's like, is there the level of civic morality and will that's going to keep us coming together and wanting to address this crisis? In terms of how I see some of the key challenges, frankly put, we have a challenge of capital in terms of flow of money to address this from a financial perspective plus inflation. These are real economic sort of pressures and factors that in Canada, right, we cannot avoid in terms of the role of our real estate sector. But also, if you look at the last 10 years, housing and the financialization of housing helped so many people build their wealth over the last 10, 15 years in the GTA, right? But despite wealth being built and that prosperity being built, there was a downside. And the downside is the worsening crisis, where many of those folks who were able to benefit from the prosperity began to contribute to helping worsen our problem in terms of renting to address in terms of finances. The second piece is the social piece, definition of affordable housing. Some will say this is what it is. No, this is what it is. And then when you start seeing social housing, you're deemed to be and pegged to be on the radical left for some odd reason. When force in a very democratic way that was thinking 30 years ahead to build our social housing stock. Has that happened on the big P political side, which is my last point around the challenge? The conservative governments build highways, they build hospitals, they build roads. They believe in building infrastructure. Affordable housing is a social purpose real estate type of infrastructure. Housing is a key social infrastructure. It unlocks vitality, it helps with economic prosperity. I think, as Michael eloquently put it, the framing of how we work with folks across the political aisle in terms of how we get investments in affordable housing infrastructure is going to be critical because whether it's a public builder model that's being championed at the local level in Toronto, whether it's conservative government saying, no, we need the private developers to drive development on housing, affordable housing, because they know how to do it and they can do it more nimble than governments. Getting caught up on that back and forth is not going to allow us to sort of begin to understand that there are reports, there have been task force, there is a national housing strategy. What we're challenging with, because we don't have the civic morality and will right now, is the execution implementation. And when people in this country, especially civic leaders, and even in our region, want to come together and solve a problem, we saw what happened during the pandemic, how quickly folks came together because of the state of crisis that we were at, and how folks across sectors, the nonprofits who were doing incredible work, governments, how folks in the private sector were chipping in resources, right? How do we sort of marshal our resources in a sort of pandemic way of thinking with this crisis? I don't think folks want to compare the two, and I understand why, because we don't want to press the emergency button, but it is an emergency. And I'll speak on a personal level. I was raised in public housing in Lawrence Heights for most of my young life. And the minute that the local councilor, Howard Moscow at the time, told my mom and a group of mothers in the community, the land that your social housing is on is so expensive, we need to sort of explore redevelopment. The group of mothers came to a house and said, listen, guys, we got to move our kids out of here. We're going to lose our housing. And so that redevelopment project at that time, and the way it was explained was, well, our families were going to get displaced. We weren't going to be provided with housing. And the public land that our housing sat on was too expensive. Fast track now, almost 20 years later, the first phase of the project's done. There's been folks who've moved out of the area because of the scare and the worry of what gentrification displacement are going to be made. But are we just going to be redeveloping communities in that type of massive manner? Or are we going to try to build complete communities, right? And what does it look like to build complete communities? So even how we've done redevelopment projects like Lawrence Heights, Regent Park, how we may do other redevelopment projects in urban centers going to help us get the trust required to build more for affordable housing. So through a pest analysis, the financial aspect is a huge challenge right now. Social perspective of like us just not being on the same page and getting stuck in ideological tribes. And the last piece is the political piece of no matter what government you speak to, the implementation of investments in infrastructure are going to be the only way that we get ourselves out of this problem. And being frank about how much it's going to cost in terms of actually getting non-market housing, as Ryan flagged, built. Thank you, Melise. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Leslie, it's true. If there's no trust, then there's going to be no effort from the community. That's one thing I have to say that I know for sure. Leslie, marrying together your hopes and worries. What is your call to action for government, investors, funds, academia, nonprofits, etc., as it relates to affordable housing in Canada?
I'll say this call to action. Not everyone will agree with my call to action. I think we need to be thinking about things at root cause and with a much longer horizon because we are so taken by the crisis and the symptoms that the crisis has caused and dealing with it on a daily basis. Um, it is the thing that is one, it's trying to address what is right in front of us. But sometimes I think what we're doing is making solutions that are short term and taking us away from really solving the inherent underlying problems that got us here in the first place. And so, as long as policymakers, politicians, businesses retain this kind of a short-term view, we will be back here again. We will be having another panel. We'll be talking about the situation. We might have felt better because we did something for a short period of time. We might have expanded who gets to talk about the issue and how we talk about it, but and healthcare and parks and open space. And it's about the livability of the region, which is a much bigger, more difficult thing, and which is why we skirt away from it. And my plea is that somewhere that we're always trying to look a little, and because I'm a planner, I can, we have to not only address the immediate, and we have immediate is setting us up for the future, and we should make choices in that way.
Thank you. Cheryl, the same question.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Leslie. I guess also as another planner-based approach to planning. And so, what does that mean? Well, there's four key components to that. I'm going to emphasize really two of them up front. And that number one is recognizing the historic decisions that have been made that enabled us to get to where we are today. The system that we're dealing with now is not natural and is not, normal. It is actually a series of decisions. Everything is, again, a series of decisions. And what does that mean in our context? So I can give you an example. So in the city of Toronto, there's a neighborhood called Weston. And so actually, no, I'm going to give you an older example, actually. 1904 was when the first permit was filed to build an apartment building in the city of Toronto. This was no more than 4 stories tall. And so that same year, the Canadian Builders and Architects magazine published an article stating that apartment building would lead to women no longer having care in homekeeping or raising a family. So you have to think about some of the social ideology that was around at the time in terms of who has access to housing, right? So you can imagine 1904, women were not working as much and they needed to have access to apartment housing in order to be able to not have to marry a man just to secure housing or have to live as a live-in servant to have their housing, right? So having diversity of options and supporting as an economy and as a community in managing our land, diversity of housing is really important and affordability is really important, but that hasn't been the priority in many ways. And that's just one example. So acknowledging and understanding the historic decisions and ideologies that have led to us being where we are today. And number two, really is about, the old adage is teach someone to fish and they'll be fed for generations, whereas if you give them just a fish, then they won't be able to do so. And so, we can use examples like, community housing is an example where you'd be giving folks housing, but then also when they try to get a better job, they get penalized and they're getting forced out of their housing and said, well, now that you have a good job, you're going to have to pay, your rent's going to be doubled immediately and you're going to have to get out of your house. So they decide not to actually develop themselves economically and to pursue greater employment and greater incomes. And so what we need to be seeing instead actually is investing in people and their success. And so that means enabling them to get into planning and development. Michael's brought up the fact that, we're hiring consultants in this industry because we need to get the work done, but there's so much work to be done. And so we really need to be investing to enable more people to take up these space because we have a lot of housing to build. And that takes all of us being able to work together and to advance that forward.
Thank you. Rosemary, the same question.
Okay, so given our focus on transit over the last 10 years, I'm a part of the Affordability Action Council, and some of the recommendations that we really focused on was the need for the government to take more leadership in building and incentivizing affordable housing. And so we felt it was really important that we're looking at direct strategy and investment by government in financing and the not-for-profit housing. I don't see replicated here in Toronto, and I've always been curious as to why. So the proposals that we've made is that the government should acquire property near transit to build net zero and climate resilient community housing infrastructure. Like I explained, as we're the Ontario line, all across Canada, we're investing in transit. We just had the Eglinton Cross down 8.5 billion, the Finch West LRT 5.5 billion, the Ontario line 19 billion, the Hamilton LRT, and many other transit projects that are being built, including the extension to the airport and the extension more east as well. And so what we're seeing is that the government is buying up all these lands along the corridor, the transit corridor. And after these transit projects are being built, you can see that their focus is going to be, selling these off to developers. And these developers, you can already see it happening. They're, putting out, proposals for, nice tall condo and luxury apartments. And so a lot of that, we want to make sure that the federal government is utilizing the opportunity that they've created by buying out all these lands and using the federal lands initiative, for example, to front load investment in property acquisition close to the rapid public transit that is now being built. We want to make sure that the federal government or the government keeps these land in the government in the government hand so that this becomes a public asset. We want to see that the Canada Lands Company, for example, they're coordinating. They're taking a direct hand in coordinating the housing developments, and that they're combining low-cost leases with other federal initiatives and an expanded rapid housing initiative to develop innovative mixed income housing on these acquired properties. And we want to see that they're leveraging the investment power of the Canada Infrastructure Bank and its mandate for green infrastructure to ensure developments and retrofits use future-friendly building and energy practices and meet at reducing the financial barriers that are being faced by land trust and cooperatives and charitable housing, not-for-profit community corporations. And the government, has this kind of, purchasing power that they really need to be able to leverage if they're going to do what they say in addressing what we all agree is a crisis. So, we think the leader that especially those that have been bought up by the government as they were building these transit projects.
Thank you. Ryan, um, I'm going to ask you a different question because the time you guys have been phenomenal. The information.
Thinking individually or even as organizations, there's a real moment in time right now, whether it's witnessing raging forest fires burning down towns in Alberta or Los Angeles, to seeing state-sanctioned violence in Gaza and people not wanting their investments to be used to fund military technology and weapons, to creating investment opportunities within your own community. And there's a lot of power in that. And there's a lot, it's a true moment in time right now is as a nonprofit sector, as a housing sector, being able to create investment vehicles and ways for people to divest and then invest in community. Something that was really powerful to me was with the Ottawa Community Land Trust. They have nearly 100 different investors, community members, neighbors. But actually, when I went to their bond celebration party, they had some local nonprofits there. One of them was a local community health center that chose to invest a pretty sizable amount from their reserve fund into the Ottawa Community Land Trust, recognizing that affordable housing is a community health issue. So as individuals, as the organizations that we represent, there's power in how we allocate our money. And also as people working within the sector, there's a moment in time to be able to create investment opportunities to gain better access to capital.
Thank you. Zach, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action?
Yeah, I think from my end, I just really encourage for there to be more alignment across our sectors and for the pressure sort of to be turned up in terms of how we target implementation around affordable housing. I think what Rosemary flagged around negotiating deals with private sector developers or even governments on making sure their commitments are clear in those type of agreements is a great way to start rallying some support. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think we've learned about the importance of getting things down on paper legally over the years. I think in terms of what Ryan's mentioned in terms around displacement, in terms of the amount of housing we need that are non-market and affordable is key. But how is this packaged? How is it delivered? You see folks doing advocacy right now on the missing middle. You have folks doing advocacy on modular housing. You have folks doing advocacy on laneway housing. Folks saying, we're going to create think tanks and nonprofits around, tackling NIMBYism, where fourplexes get canceled in Etobicoke, for example. So my call to action is for there to be more deepened alignment, and for us to be very clear and concise about how we want government to implement and execute on affordable housing, and for there to be deepened alignment from folks across industries and sectors. Because then governments, in terms of the private sector and broadly speaking, cannot just address some of these issues in a niche manner or see us all as stakeholders. We should all be just one collective stakeholder in terms of how we want the problem to be addressed. And I think that level of togetherness and sort of a civic morality that I hope will bind us will really help us begin to sort of deeply tackle and address the problem from a sort of future-proof perspective, right? If you look at huge developments that have some patient capital, like the Canada Lands development at Northcrest, they're talking in 40, 50-year scopes all the time. They're talking about building a brand new community. When we think about affordable housing and the crisis that we face collectively and how we want to address it, we're thinking of getting something done now, right? We're always being deemed to be very reactive. So how do we, and even some of the goals that you hear from different orders of government, that's not going to work in terms of them speaking highly. That's just very reactive within 4-year cycles. And so that's my call. My call to action is for more deep in alignment, more togetherness on the file, and for us to sort of really tangibly encourage the government to implement and execute on this now for the sake of all our community's interest. So that would be my last piece, Melissa, in terms of a call to action.
Thank you. I wish I could continue on and ask everybody else the questions, but as we are closing soon, I wouldn't be able to do that. But what I do want to say is I just want to thank you guys for your consistent leadership and for your time, especially someone who comes from that part of the sector that you guys are working. You guys are so impactful for the community, and it's very touching actually to see how much work and effort that you guys are putting in. Just let everybody know the recording is going to be available. And as we start with Ceci is exactly how we close. As always, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on, we also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who have toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and the community stewards whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you for everyone for joining this affordable housing panel, and thank you all. And the next session will be coming up next.